ኦኬ ሰው ባለፈው ካቆምንበት እንቀጥላለን ጃቫችንን and start.
In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to read input from the user. In Java, we have this scanner class that is defined in
Java.util package. Let's import this and create a scanner object. So new scanner. Now here inside this parenthesis, we need to specify where we're going to read data from. Are we going to read it from the terminal window? Are we going to read it from a file or what? To work with the terminal window, we type system.in. This is one of the fields in the system class. A field, as I told you before, is like a variable that we define in a class. So we have system.in, we also have system.out, which we use to print something on the terminal, right? Now, let's use system.in and terminate this statement with a semicolon. Now, this object has a bunch of methods for reading data, and all these methods start with next. So we have next byte for reading a byte, we have next line for reading a line, we have next boolean for reading a boolean, and so on. So let's call the next byte method and see what we get. This returns a byte value, so we can store it in a byte variable. Let's say someone's age. And then we print it on a terminal saying you are plus age. So here we're concatenating a string with a byte. And in this scenario, we're going to have implicit casting or implicit type conversion. So Java will automatically convert this byte variable here to a string so they can be added together. Okay. Now let's run this program and see what happens. So here in the terminal window, we can type 20, enter, and it says you're 20. Beautiful. But this is pretty boring. Let's add a label here and ask the user to type something. For example, before reading data, we're going to call the printline method and say age colon. Now let's run the program. So we get this label here. However, whatever we type will appear on the next line. This is because the printline method adds a new line after this label. To solve this issue, we call the print method. Now let's run the program one more time. We get this pop-up box because our program hasn't finished execution. So we need to tell IntelliJ that we want to stop and rerun this program. All right. Now, whatever we type appears right in front of this label. Beautiful. Enter, you are 20. Now, what if we type a floating point number like 20.1? We get an exception because this method can only parse byte values. If you want to get a floating point number, we need to call next float or next double. What if you want to read a string? We don't have next string. We have next and next line. Let's look at the differences. So first I'm going to call the next method. Here we have a compilation issue because this method returns a string. I'm going to change this to a string. Let me collapse this. That's better. We should also rename this variable. So what was the shortcut? Shift and F6. Now let's rename this to name. Enter. Beautiful. And one last time, we should also update the label, name. Run the program. So I'm going to type my name here, Mosh. It says you're Mosh. Beautiful. One more time. This time I'm going to type my full name, Mosh Hamedani. But we don't get the last name. Here's the reason. These words that we have here, these are called tokens. Every time we call the next method, it reads one token. So here we have a space, we have two tokens, and we need to call the next method 2 times to get the full name. The first time we call it, it returns Mosh. The second time we call it, it returns Hamedani. Then we need to combine these two together. This is not ideal. So that's when we use the next line method. With this method, we get the entire line that the user enters, no matter how many spaces or tabs are there. Take a look. So, Mosh Hamedani, and we get the full name. Now, what if I type a few spaces before my name? Let's see what happens. So those spaces also appear here, and this looks a little bit odd. This is where we use the trim method. Remember, with trim, we can get rid of all these white spaces before or after a string. So this next line method returns a string that we are storing in this variable, right? Now, just before storing the result in this variable, here we can use the dot operator to access the members of this string object. So we call the trim method, and then store the result in this variable. Once again, we're chaining multiple methods here. Let's run the program. So a few spaces, Mosh Hawadani, and we get this beautiful output.
Okay, so የእንትናችን ባለፈው አይተናታል አይደለ? የዚች የኤጃችን እንዴት እንደምትወጣው መጀመሪያ ስካነራችንን እንትንላለን። ከዛ በኋላ so ስካነራችን የሚሰራው ምንድነው? it just scan what the user is about to feed the system ማለት ነው። so ዩዘሩ የሚያስገባውን ነገር ለመቀበል ሲስተም ኢን እንላለን። so ያንን የተቀበለውን ነገር ያስቀምጥልናል ማለት ነው። so የተቀበልነውን ነገር እንትን ከተቀበልን በኋላ so what we do is ይሄንን ተቀብሎ የት ላይ ነው የሚያደርገው? እዚች ስካነሩ ላይ ነው አይደል? so እሷ ስካነር ላይ ያስቀምጥና ከዛ ይሄኛው we just tell him what to do, what kind of data እንዲያስገባልን እንደምንፈልግ ሰውየው like age ብለነው string ሊያስገባልን አይችልም አይደል? so ምንም ካልጻፍንለት ግን string ምንም ሌላም ነገር ሊያስገባልን ስለሚችል so make sense የሚያደርግ ነገር ስትሰጡት ትክክለኛ ኢንፎርሜሽን ለማስገባት ይሞክራል ማለት ነው። so please enter your age ስንለው እድሜውን እንዲያስገባ ይጠይቀዋል። ከዛ ያስገባውን እድሜ which is እቺ ስካነሯ ላይ ነው የሚያስገባው። so scanner dot next byte ስንል so byte ማለት ያው ዳታ ታይፕ ከ128 እስከ 128 ናታ ኔጌቲቭ 128 እስከ 128 ነው የምትይዘልን። so ከዛ በላይ ኤጅ የለም ብለን ስላሰብን so በቂ ነው ብለን አንተን ነው ማለት ነው። so ዳብል ምናምን ማድረግ እንችላለን ግን ኤጅ ነው የተቀበልን ያለነውና ሜክ ሴንስ የሚያደርግ ነገር ደግሞ ባይት በቂ ነው ለኤጅ ማለት ነው። so ባይት የሚለውን እንጠቀማለን። ከዛ ኔክስት ባይት ብለን ያንን ያስገባውን ነገር ማን ላይ እንሰይማለን? ኤጅ የምትባል ቫሪያብል ላይ ሰየምናት ማለት ነው። ከዛ ሲስተም አውት print len ስናደርገው so your age is ብለን ኮንካትኔት አድርገን ኤጅን አብረን ስንሰጠው ልክ እንደዚህ አድርጎ እንትን ይላል ማለት ነው። so we already did this. If we have to redo it, like rerun እናድርገውና what's happening? okay Windows 7 certificate. okay so ኤጃችን let's say 50 ነው ብንል so enter ስንለው your age is 50 ብሎ ይመልስልናል ማለት ነው። so what if it's a string ሲሆን ደግሞ string ነው እንዲመልስልን የምንፈልገውና so ይሄ ነገር string እንዲመልስ ከፈለግን እዚህ ጋር age ብለን ያስቀመጥናት string value እንድትይዝ ስለምንፈልግ we put string እዚህ ጋር አይደለ string እናደርጋለን ማለት ነው። so obviously string እና byte is not እንትን እያሉ አይደሉም ማለት ነው አይደለ? so string value ይቀመጥብክ እያልነው ግን እዚህ ጋር ያስቀመጥን ያለነው value ግን በባይት ነው። so ይሄንን byte we're not gonna give byte ማለት ነው። so just next የምትለዋ ሜተድ ብቻ እንጠቀማለን። this knows like it is a string already by itself ማለት ነው። so stringን ይሰይማል። ይሄኛውን instead of enter your age we can say enter your name. so we say enter your name. ከዛ በኋላ like your name is ብለን your name is we say instead of age let's put name አርገን ሴቭ እናርጋት። ከዛ እቺ name define ስላልተደረገች እዚህ ጋር መተን ቀይ የሆነችው define ስላልተደረገች ነው እዚህ ጋር መተን name ስንላት ትክክለኛ እንትን ያደርጋል ማለት ነው። so if we run this like in run ስናደርገው name የሚለውን ነገር ይጠይቀናል እዚህ ጋር ማለት ነው። please enter your name. okay so the name is Danny. ከዛ enter ሳደርገው Danny your name is Danny ብሎ ይጽፋል ማለት ነው። so the next thing is a space ሲኖረውና ሳይኖረው so space ሙሉ name ባስገባ what's gonna happen? so ሙሉ name ሳስገባ ምንድነው የሆነው? okay so I say Danny ከበደ ብዬ ልክ እንትን ስለው ኤንተር ሳረገው የመጀመሪያውን ብቻ ነው የሚያነበው ያያችሁ ነው የመጀመሪያውን ብቻ ይሄ ሁሉንም እያነበበልን አይደለም ይሄ ኔክስት የምትለዋ ነገር የምትሰራው ላይክ ለመጀመሪያው ለገባችሁ ብቻ ነው ማለት ነው the whole thing እንዲያነብልን ከፈለግን ልክ እቺ print line ብለን እንዳስቀመጥናት ለዚህም ላይን ኤሌን ማለት basically ላይን ናት አይደለ እዚህ ጋር ኤሌን ኖሮት ቢሆን ኖሮ የምንጽፈው ከስር ነበር የሚሆነው አይደለ እዚህ ጋር ኤሌን አድርገን ቢሆን ኖሮ print line ብለን ቢሆን ኖሮ እንትን ያልነው ይሄን ፕሌይ ብናደርገው ለምሳሌ ልክ አሁን እዚህ ጋር መተን መጻፍ ስንጀምር ልክ እታች ነው የሚጽፈው አያችሁት ዳኒ ቢስጽፍ ከስር ነው የሚጽፈው እቺ ሙሉ ላይን ማለት ናት እቺን ነው እዚህ ጋር የምናስገባው ማለት ነው እዚህ ጋር ሲገባ ግን we put it like this line ብለን እናስገባዋለን ማለት ነው ሙሉ ላይኑን እንዲያነብልን ማለት ነው ሙሉ ላይኑን እንዲያነብልን ካለ ስፔሱንም ምኑንም ያለውን የጠቅላላ የተጻፈውን ያነባል ማለት ነው ያ ማለት እስከ ላስት ኔም ሳስገባለት ይቀበላል ማለት ነው አሁን your name is ዳኒ ከበደ ብሎ አስቀመጠ ይሄንን ካደረገልን በኋላ ደግሞ if we wanted ስፔሶቹ ከፊት ለፊት ሰውየው ድንገት ሲያስገባ በስህተት ስፔስ ምናምን አርጎ ቢሆን ኖሮ ያየናት ትሪም የምትባል እንትን አለችና እሷን እዚች ላይ በቃ መቀጠል ነው ማለት ነው ዶት ትሪም አድርገን ትሪም የምትለዋ ምንድነው መሰራለን ብለናል ከፊት ያለችውን ስፔስ ታጠፋለች ነው ያልነው አይደለም ባለፈው እንትን ያልነው ከፊት ለፊት ስፔስ ኖሮት ብጽፈው ታሳስቻውን እዚህ ጋር ጻፍኩ ብዬ ላይክ ይሄን ያህል ስፔስ አድርጌ ዳኒ ብዬ ብጽፍ if I put Danny K እዚህ ጋር ያለው ስፔስ አንድ ነው እቺኛው ስፔስ ከመጣችሁ ከዚች ጋር ያለችው ስፔስ ናት ይሄኛው ሙሉ ስፔስ አልወሰደም ማለት ነው what if I do the same thing እቺኛው ትሪም ባትኖር ግን it's gonna be ምንድነው የሚሆነው ይሄ ሁሉ ስፔስ ሙሉ ላይኑን ስለሆነ አንብብ ያልነው ይሄ ነገር እዚህ ጋር ሙሉ ላይኑን ስለሆነ አንብብ ያልነው እዚህ ጋር መጥቻን ዳኒ space አድርጌ k ስለው see how much space it gave ይሄንን ስፔስ ያጠፋልናል ማንንም ያጠፋልን ትሪም የምትለዋ ነገር ማለት ነው ግልጽ ነው ጋይስ
አዎ ዳኒ ግልጽ ነው
All right, now it's time for a project. I want you to use what you have learned in this section and build a mortgage calculator like this. So when we run this program, we get a few questions. The first question is the principal or the amount of loan we want to get. Let's say $100,000. The second question is the annual interest rate. Let's say 3.92%. And the third question is period in years. Let's say we want to get a loan for 30 years. So this program calculates our monthly payments and displays it as a currency. This is a great exercise for you to practice all the materials you learn in this section.
ይሄንን መስራት አንችልም እንዴት አድርጎ ነው ካልኩሌት ያደረገው እስቲ ካልኩሌተራችን እንትን ነውና ሰማቶ ሺህ ብር ነው የተበደረው 700 ሺህ ብር በ30 አመት እንዴት ነው ሞርጌጅ ካልኩሌት የሚደረገው 30 አመት 3.292 ኢንተረስት ይሄንን ለ3.92 ነው እናበዛው ከዛ ሲካፈል ለ30 ነው 30 በወር ነው የምናደርገው ለካ 30 ወር ማለት 30 አመት በወር ስንት ይሆናል ማለት 30 ሲባዛ በ12 ማለት ነው 360 okay 100,000 times 3.92 divided by 360 nope how do we calculate mortgage አለ የለም እዚህ እንትን ውስጥ Kofilla? Nice.
Now, before you get started, I want to give you a few hints. Here's a formula for calculating the mortgage or the monthly payments. I found this page on wikihow.com. It's called Calculate Mortgage Payments. So let's see how this works. Mortgage equals P or principal or the amount we're going to loan multiplied by R, which is our monthly interest rate. This is very important. So this number that we get here is our annual interest rate. We need to divide this by 12. Also, take into account that this number is represented as a percent. To calculate the actual interest rate, you need to divide this number by 100. So in this example, the interest rate is 0.0392. So whatever the user enters, divided by 100 and then divided by 12 to get to the monthly interest rate. Now we have this monthly interest rate. We need to multiply this by this expression. Here we need to add 1 to this interest rate and raise it to the power of n, where n is the number of payments. So we need to multiply this number by 12 or 12 months to calculate the number of payments. Now, to raise this number to the power of n, you need to use the POW method of the math class. So this math class has this POW or power method that takes 2 arguments or 2 values, a and b. So go ahead and spend 10 to 15 minutes on this exercise. When you're done, come back, see my solution.
Okay, so نمقرأ. So okay, so let's say መጀመሪያ እንትናችንን እናስቀምጥ ፎርሙላችንን። so r ማለት ኢንተረስቷ ናት ብሏል። so ኢንተረስቷ ለስንት ነው የምትካፈለው? ለ 3 point interneted 3.92 ነው የሰጠነው። የላችሁም እንዴ? ምንድነው ዝም አላችሁኝ? አራገዙ
Sorry, Danny. 0.0392.
392 ነው
ሰው
ያልከው።
ሲካፈል ለመቶ አድርገን የምንወስደው ማለት ነው አይደለም? ይሄ so which is
0.0 ነው የሚያደርገው።
so 0.0392. Is it like this?
Yeah.
አዎ
ሁለት ዜሮ ነው እና አንድ ዜሮ ነው። ኦኬ ችግር የለውም ስናካፍለው
አካፍለን ማግኘት እንችላለን።
ኦኬ ሶ ከዛ በሱ እናበዛና 1 plus r አድርገን to the power of n እስቲ ካልኩሌት እና እያደረግነው እንሞክረውና ትክክለኛ ቁጥር እንደመጣን መጀመሪያ
ከዛ በ12 ምናምን ያባዛው ያካፍል።
እ
ይሄንን ለመቶ አካፍሎ በ12 ነው ያባዛው።
አካፈለው በ12
በ12 ነው ያካፈለው። እንደዛ አድርጎ
so እንደዛ ነው። so
አዎ
3.92 divided by 100 ይሄ መጣል። ኦኬ እኔ አንድ ዜሮ ጨምራለሁ እዚህ ጋር። ኦኬ so ከዛ ይሄንን በ12 አካፈለው አባዛ
በዛውን አካፈለው። እስኪ እዛ ጋር ጽሁፉ ምን ይላል? divided your annual interest rate by 12 ይላል።
calculate by dividing your annual interest rate by 12. Okay. So ሲካፈል 12 እናረግ ይሄን የሚመጣው ቁጥራችን ማለት ነው። so ይሄንን ቁጥር እዛ ሲደመር 1 plus r ማለት እዚህ ላይ ማለት ነው አይደል? ከዛ ደግሞ n ማለት ምንድነው? n is your number of payments
30 ማለት ነው ይሩ
you will be paying the loan. so 180 እንዴት ነው የሆነው? 180 ግን 30 አመት ካለ 180 ይሆናል እንዴ? ለ30 አመት 30 አመት ማለት እኮ like 360 ወር ነው ያለው አይደል? ኦኬ
ቅድም
ነው አይመስለኝም። እንደዛ ነው 30 ዓመት 360 ወር አይ ይመስለኛል።
ሶ አላ እሺ ታዲያ 30 ዓመት ማለት በ12 ዓመት ይባዛው 30 ሶ ያ 360 ነው።
ኦኬ
ሶ I don't know አመት 80 ሰው እዚህ ጋር እንዴት እንዳስቀመጠ I don't understand ግን እሺ እንደዛ ራሱ ከሆነ ፕሪንሲፓላችን ያ ነው። ኦኬ ፕሪንሲፓሉ መጨረሻ ነው የምናበዛው ያንን ካልኩሌት አድርገን ከጨረስን በኋላ ሶ እሺ የቅድሟን ቁጥር እናምጣትና ዋይ ቱ ማች እንትን ነው ይሄ ቁጥሩን ፖይንቱ በዛል 3.92 divided by 100 and times 12. No, divided by 12, not a lot. Divided by 12 and again divided by 12. So ይሄ ቁጥር ነው ያመጣልን። so ይሄንን ከአንድ ጋር እንደምርና so ይሄን ቁጥር ሴቭ እናድርገው እዚህ ጋር እሺ እንዳነሳሳት ደግሞ ድጋሚ so 0.00326 this screen so ይሄንን ካገኘን በኋላ ከአንድ ጋር ደምረን the exponent of n ነው እናደርገው so ሲደመር አንድ ከዛ exponent of n ማለት how do we do that በዚህ አይቻልም እንዴ እንደዛ መስራት no ካልኩሌት አድርጌ ኮንትሮል ለማምጣት ፈልጌ ነው ግን I don't know okay you know what never mind እኔ actual ቁጥሩን ሰርተን እንድናየው ብዬ ነበር ያቺ 400 ምናምን የምትለዋን ሰርተን ለማምጣት ነበር የፈለኩት just እንስራውና እንደዚሁ ከዛ በኋላ አውቶማቲካሊ ሰርቶ የሚሰጠንን ቁጥር እንላለን አይደል መጀመሪያ ምንድነው የምናደርገው የሚበደረውን ፍራንክ መቀበል አለብን አይደል ከዛ ኢንተረስቱን መቀበል አለብን ከዛ number of payments so number of payments የሚወሰነው በምንድን ነው number of payments so you know የሚወስነው number of payments ከዛ ኋላ መንዝሊ ምን ያህል መክፈል እንዳለበት እናግረዋለን እዚህ ላይ ዛ ሶስት ነገር ነው የተቀበለ የነበረው
payments
so ይሄ 100,000 392 እና 30 per years መክፈል የምትፈልገው in years ነው እየጠየቀው ያለው ከዛ ኋላ ሞርጌጁ ይሄን ያህል ይመጣል ኦኬ ሶ መጀመሪያ እንትናችንን በዚህ መንገድ እንትን እናርግ እንቀበል ሶ የመጀመሪያው ኦኬ ስካነር ብለን ከዛ ፕሪንሲፓላችንን እንቀበል principal equals to new scanner system in system. Okay. So and then ስንቀበል we say system out መጨረሻ ላይ እናደርጋለን። ኦኬ ለሁሉም ማለት ነው። ተራ በተራ ዞሮ ዞሮ ማድረጋችን አይቀር። so ኦኬ ይሄን ላይን እየደገምነው እንሂድና ኦኬ ይሄኛው ለአኑዋል ኢንተረስት ሬታችን ይሁን። ከዛ ደግሞ ይሄኛው ደግሞ ለፔሪድ ወይም years ምን ያህል year መክፈል እንዳለበት። so this one, let's say this is interest rate. And let's put interest. This one, years. Okay. So ሶስቱን ተቀብለን ከዛ የምንመልሰው መልስ ሞርጌጅ ነው የሚሆነልን ማለት ነው። so ሶስቱን ስንቀበል ለእያንዳንዳቸው እንደዚህ አይነት እንትን መስጠት አለብንና so let's copy this one and paste and paste. Okay, so please enter your loan amount and ከዛ ይሄኛውን ደግሞ your interest rate, then please enter how many years you like to pay. So በምን ያህል ዓመት ውስጥ መክፈል ትፈልጋለህ እንበለውና so ሎኑን ከሰጠነው በኋላ ያስገባልን አይደለ? so ሎኑን ከሰጠነው በኋላ የሚያስገባልን ምን አይነት ነገር ነው? so it's something like that. Can እንጻፈው እሺ so it's gonna be this time it's a big number አይደለ? አላችሁ
አለ ዳኒ አለ
double p እንበላት ፕሪንሲፓሏን ለማሳጠር ያክል so ፕሪንሲፓሉን ተቀበልልን። ከየት ነው የምትቀበልልን? ከስካን አድርገን ካስገባ ነው አይደለ? so ስካን አድርገን ያስገባነው ማ ብለናል? ፕሪንሲፓል ብለናል አይደለ? so we say principal dot so next man next what double አይደለ? double አይደለ እየጠየቅን ያለ ነው ቫልዩአችን so double አድርገን እንዲያስገባልን እንነግረዋለን ማለት ነው። so ይሄን ያስገባል and right here copy እናድርገው so interest rateም double ነው መሆን ያለበት ምክንያቱም ወይም ፍሎት ነው መሆን ያለበት አይደለ? since it's a point ያለው ነገር ስለሆነ የምንቀበለው ኢንተረስታችንም እንደዛው ነው መሆን ያለበት so let's make it short I አድርገን እንቀበላት እሷን capital ነው small okay let's put I this so this time የምትቀበለው ከማን ነው? ከዚህኛው አይደለ? ከኢንተረስት interest የምትለውን እንነግረዋለን ማለት ነው። okay so the third one is gonna be the years so number of years ግማሽ ዓመት ምናምን አይልም so difference ስለሚል probably integer is good enough so we can say right there int and we change this to y, that is the year, and years. Okay, perfect. So እነዚህን ተቀበልን እቺን ለጊዜው እንትን እናድርጋት ኮሜንት አውት እናድርጋት and okay so አሁን እየሰራን ያለ ነው እያንዳንዱ እንዲቀበልን ያደረግነው let's check የሰራነውን ነገር run እናድርግና so enter loan amount ይላል so loan amount ላይ we say let's say ይሄን ያህል ብር ተቀበለ ከዛ interest rate አስገባ ይላል 3.92 ከዛ number of years how you like to pay so let's say 30 years ከዛ ያስገባነውን እነዚህን ነው ማለት ነው አይደል so አሁን እነዚህን ተጠቅመን okay እነዚህን ተጠቅመን ካልኩሌሽናችንን ነው የምንሰራው so how do we calculate ወደሚለው ነው የምንመጣው ማለት ነው okay so አንደኛ ነገር መስራት ያለብን እቺ year የምትለዋ ነገር ወደ ወር መቀየር መቻል አለባት አይደል በአመት ስላልሆነ እንትን የምንሰራው ማለት ነው so number of payments gotta be changed to months አይደለ so እቺን ወደ መንዝ መቀየር አለብን whatever እዚች value ላይ የምትገባውን ነገር ወደ መንዝ ብዛቷ መቀየር አለብን ሰውየው በአመት ነው የሚያስገባልን how many years ነው ያልነው so how many years you like to pay so በ30 አመት መክፈል ፈልጋለሁ ካለ 30 አመትን በወር ለመቀየር ምንድነው የምናደርገው
360
በ12 ማባዛት ነው አይደል so የሰጠንን አመት በ12 ስናበዛው ወሩን ማግኘት እንችላለን so we do that first okay so እዚህ ጋር እንምጣና ካልኩሌሽናችንን እንጀምር ማለት ነው so ቫልዩአችንን ሁሉንም ተቀብለን ይዘናል so አሁን ካልኩሌሽናችን ከመጀመራችን በፊት so let's say int n stands for number of months okay guys number of months equals to y which is the number of years times what 12 simple አይደል so 30 አመት ከሆነ 30 አመት አባዝቶ ለዚች ኢንቲጀር ላይ n የተባለችው እንትን ላይ ያስቀምጥልናል ማለት ነው okay እንትናችን ጋር
Now, to raise this
okay so
number to the power of n, you need to put in interest by 100 as a rate amount we're going to. Here's the formula for calculating the mortgage or the monthly payments. I found this page on wikihow.com. It's called Calculate Mortgage Payments. So let's see how this works. Mortgage equals P or principal or the amount we're going to loan multiplied by R, which is our monthly interest rate. This is very important. So this number that we get here is our annual interest rate. We need to divide this by 12. Also, take into account that this number is represented as a percent. To calculate the actual interest rate, you need to divide this number by 100. So in this example, the interest rate is 0.0392. So whatever the user enters, divided by 100 and then divided by 12 to get to the monthly interest rate. Now we have this monthly interest rate. We need to.
Okay, so እቺኛዋ interest rate, annual interest rate, it should be annual አይደለ annual interest rate ነው የሚያስገባልን so እሷንም interest rateአችንን መቀየር አለብን so interest rateአችን monthly monthly so እዚህ ጋር ምልክት ያደርጋል ለመሄድ ያክል so n is number of months okay so እዚህ ጋር እንትን ይኖረናል so አሁን ያንን እንትን መቀየር አለብን ኢንተረስታችንን so ኢንተረስታችንን ለመቀየር we're going to be like no int it got to be double አይደለ so since it's እንትን ስለሆነ ማለት ነው point ያለውና ረጅም ነምበር ስለሚሆን double ማድረግ አለብን so int r equals to this is the interest rate r is interest rate for months yearly annually ስለሆነ ይሄ like በወር ነው ካልኩሌት ማድረግ ያለብንና so r equals to መጀመሪያ ይሄ የሚያስገባልን annual ስለሆነ 3.92 ሲያስገባ ልክ እንደዚህ annual interest rate የገባውን ቁጥር ምን እናደርጋለን ለመቶ እናካፍላለን አይደል so የገባው ቁጥር ማን ነው አራ ማለት ስጡኝ ወይ እሺ ኢንተረስታችን ነው የገባው ቁጥር i ነው so i divide by 100 እናደርጋለን ከዛ ይሄንን ካካፈለ በኋላ ቅድሚያ ለመስጠት እንደዚህ ነው የምናደርገው አይደል ከዛ ይሄንን ካካፈለ በኋላ ደግሞ ምን አድርገው ድጋሚ ለ12 አካፍሉ so ቅድሚያ ስንሰጥ ይሄንን ያካፍላል መጀመሪያ ከዛ ደግሞ ድጋሚ ለ12 ያካፍላል ከዛ ማን ላይ ያስቀምጣል r ላይ ያስቀምጣል so r ማናት rate of months ናቸው interest rate of months ናት okay so interest number of months አግኝተናል ምን ያህል ወር እንደሚከፈል and ምን ያህል interest እንደሚከፈል አግኝተናል perfect so let's continue so አሁን ይሄንን ካገኘን ያቺን ፎርሙላ መጻፍ ነው ሊትራሊ በቃ ፎርሙላውን በስርዓት መጻፍ ነው so save የሚደረገው ማለት ላይ ነው አንድ እንትን ይኖረናል ማለት ነው mortgage so mortgageአችንን it might be ሳንቲም ምናምን ሊኖረው ስለሚችል we're going to put the mortgage to አሁንም double እናደርገዋለን ማለት ነው oops do double ከዛ mortgage so mortgage equals to okay አሁን በቃ ፎርሙላውን በስርዓት መጻፍ ነው so ፎርሙላውን ስንጽፍ መጀመሪያ we need okay so አሁን እዚህ ጋር አይታችሁ ከሆነ እዚህ ጋርና እዚህ ጋር ያለው ቫልዩ አንድ አይነት ቫልዩ ነው አይደል 1 plus r to the power of n 1 plus r to the power of n አይደል so let's do that first so that it makes ምንሰራውን ነገር እንዲያቀልልን ማለት ነው so እሷን የሆነ ነገር ላይ እንሰይማት ሲምፕል ለማድረግ ያክል so እዚች ጋር እንምጣና let's say double let's assume x እንበላት እሷን value okay x is good okay so x እንበላትና እቺ ምትመጣልን 1 plus r the exponent of n ምትለዋን ማለት ነው okay so አሁን what we do is power የሚባል እንትን አለን አይደል exponent የሚለውን ለመጠቀም so we say math dot power so pow so እዚህ ጋር አሁን ካያችሁ double a እና double b ይላል so a the power of b ማለት ነው okay እሺ so ያንን ስንጽፈው አሁን እዚህ ጋር double እዛ ጋር a አለን value so እዚህ ጋር a ማለት ማን ነው 1 plus r ነው አይደል so let's put እዚች ጋር ቅንፍ እናድርግለትና 1 plus r ያው still r ነው so r እንደምርና comma ከዛ to the power of ማን ነው n ነው then semicolon ብናደርግለት is it gonna give us an error ምንም error አልሰጠንም perfect so 1 plus r ስንል እቺኛው ውስጥ ያለችው ነው to the power of n ስንል ፓወሩን ያደርግልናል ማለት ነው so ያቺን ማን ሰየምናት x ላይ ሰይመናታል so አሁን እዚች ጋር መተን ሞርጌጃችንን ስንሰራ ሲምፕል ይሆንልናል ማለት ነው so r-ን መጀመሪያ በp ነው ከሁሉም የሚቀድመው እዚህ ያለው so we say p is our principal okay so p ብለን ከዛ ቀነፍ እናድርግ so p times we can say right there times so the first one is r times x ከላይ ያለው r times x ማለት x እቺኛዋ ናት r ደግሞ ይሄ እንትናችን ነው x እቺ ናት ብለናል so ከr ጋር እናበዛታለን ማለት ነው ኦኬ so ይሄንን አባዛለን ከዛ ይሄንን ግን መጀመሪያ ከንትን ጋር ነው የሚያካፍለው ስለዚህ we're going to put a big እንትን ከዛ ሲካፈል እንላለን ሲካፈል ማን ነው
x minus 1
perfect so we say x minus 1 so x minus 1ን መጀመሪያ እቺ ውስጥ ያለችውን ነው የሚሰራው so እቺን ያባዛል እዛችን ያባዛል እዛችን አካፍሎ መጨረሻ ላይ በp ያበዛል ማለት ነው make sense ያደርጋል
yeah
okay ከዛ ኋላ እዚህ ጋር መተን አውትፑታችን ላይ ምን እንዲሰጠና እንፈልገው sort so we say
mortgage
your payment is ብለን ባንካትኔት የምናደርገው ማለት ነው
ዶላር እንትን ብሩ ማለት ነው
mortgage አይደለ okay I hope this works let's see ከተሳሳተንም ከሱ ያየን እናርማለን ምን ማለት አለ okay running render ሲያደርግ ትንሽ ጊዜ ይፈጃል okay so let's put 100 ሺህ ብር 100 no ስንት ዜሮ ነው የጻፍኩት ትክክለኛ
ልክ ነህ
okay 100 ሺህ ከዛ ኋላ interest rate is 3.92 annually now ከዛ number of payments you like to make let's put in year አይደለ በ30 አመት so perfect so you እንደዚህ አቅድም ያመጣለት
yeah
Apply this by this expression. Here we need to add 1 to this interest rate and to multiply this.
yeah
47,281 so ግልጽ ነው ያልገባችሁ ነገር አለ እዚህ ላይ
አሪፍ ነው በካልኩሌተር አልመጣልን እንጂ
አይ እሱ አይሰራልኝም እኔ ፕሮግራሚንግ ነው የሚሰራልኝ
አሪፍ ነው ዳንዬ
it's so confusing ለነጋኛው
I know
ሞርጌጅ ሲኖራችሁ እንደዚህ ያመጣችሁ እንሰራላችኋለን ትያለሽ
Now I'm going to try 12 or 12 months to calculate the number of payments. Now, to raise this number to the
አይ የምር ግን እዚህ ጋር ሰው ክሊር ያልሆነለት ነገር ካለ ኤክስፕሌን አድርገን እንለፍ everybody's good
አሪፍ ነው ለኔ።
Okay.
Power of n, you need to use the POW method of the math class. So this math class has this POW or power method that takes two arguments or two values, a and b. So go ahead and spend 10 to 15 minutes on this exercise. When you're done, come back, see my solution. All right, let's see what I've done here. And by the way, don't worry if your code is different from mine. We all think and code differently, so it's perfectly fine if your code is different. Just look at my code, see what I've done here, and see if there are ways you can improve your code. That's what matters, okay? So here in our main method, first I've declared two final variables or constants. The first one is months in year, which I've set to 12, and the second one is percent, which I've set to 100. The reason I declared this constants is that I didn't want to have magic numbers in this code. So over here, where we calculate the monthly interest, we get the annual interest and divide it by percent and then months in year. This code is very self-explanatory. Someone else reading this code will have no problem understanding what's going on here. In contrast, if you had a magic number here, like divide by 12 and then 4, whatever, someone else reading this code would wonder, what is this 4 doing here? What is 12? Now, it's quite obvious to you that 12 is the number of months in a year, but trust me, sometimes other people cannot see this straight away. So, as a best practice, avoid magic numbers in your code. Always use constants or final variables to describe them. So, let's revert this back. All right. So, after declaring this constants, I have created this scanner object. Here we ask the first question, principal, and we read the answer as an integer. I thought integer is a good data type for storing the principal. Because short is not enough, with short we can store a maximum of $32,000. That's not enough. What if someone wants to find us $1 million? So int is good, and it allows us to store a value up to 2 billion. Next, we ask the second question, annual interest rate. We read this as a float. Here I could use double, but the interest rate is a small number, so float is sufficient for that. We don't really need double. So we get the annual interest, and then based on that, we calculate the monthly interest. Also, see how I have named my variables? All variables have a proper, meaningful names. There are no magic words here like MI as in short for monthly interest or M1 or M2. Do not use magic names for your variables. Always use meaningful and descriptive names. All right. Next, we get the period. We read this as a byte because the maximum number we want to support is 30. So 1 byte is sufficient to store the number 30.
Okay, so አንድ ስህተት የሰራ ነው ነገር ካያችሁ እዚህ ላይ ለእያንዳንዱ ኦብጀክት እየከፈትኩ ነው የሰራሁት። just do like አንዴ ነው እሱ እንትን ያደረገው። so አንዴ ኦብጀክት ስካነር ሲስተም ኢን አለ ከዛ ኋላ ስካን እንዲያደርግለት ነው በቃ እየጠራ እንትን የሚያደርገው ማለት ነው። so scanner int ፕሪንሲፓሉን እንደዚህ ስካነር የታለ ደግሞ እዚህ ጋር ስካነር ኔክስት ባይት ያቻ እንዴት እንትን እንደሚለው so I don't think I have to declare እያንዳንዱን ኦብጀክት ለየብቻ አንድ ሲስተም ሲያስገባ እያረኩ እንትን ማለት የለብኝም ማለት ነው። so I can do just one general የሆነ እንትን አድርጌ በዚቹ ስካነር ተጠቅሜ like literally ስካን አርግ ነው በቃ። ስለዚህ ከሰውየው የሚያስገባውን እንዲያስገባ እንትን መጠየቅ ነው። so እዚህ ጋር ነው የምንለየው እዚች ጋር በመጽፈው እንትን ነው። so annual interest አለ ስካን አረገ። እዚህ ጋር መጣና ደግሞ years አለና እዚህ ጋር ድጋሚ ስካን አረገ። so እኔ ግን ሳደርግ so principal ብዬ ይሄንን እንትን ተጠቀምኩኝ ወይም ስካነር ያለው እሱ እዚህ ጋር ስካነር ብሎ ሴቭ ስላደረገው ነው። ኦኬ እኔ ለእያንዳንዱ ስም ሰጥቼ እንትን ስላደረኩት ነው። so አንዴ ካሰራችሁት ስካነሩን እዛላ ስካነሩን ድጋሚ የጠራችሁ you can do multiple እንትን ማለት ነው። እና ሌላው ደግሞ ስሞቹን እንደዚህ ሞር ግልጽ አድርጎ ማስቀመጣችን ደግሞ ቀጣይ ላለው ሰው ወይም አሁን ራሴው ራሱ ማለት ነው ኔክስት ታይም መጥቼ ስከፍተው ግራ ይገባኛል። እውነቱን ነው like እንደነዚህ በስርዓት ኔሚንጋችን እንደዚህ ግልጽ ያለ ካልሆነ በቃ እንኳን ለሰው አይደለም ለራሳችን ራሱ መልሰን ኔክስት ታይም መተን ስናነበው what we doing right there ምናምን ነገር እያልን እንትን እንላለን ማለት ነው። ግን ያው እኔ ትንሽም ቢሆን ኤላቦሬት ለማድረግ ሞክሬያለሁ እዚህ ጋር አትሊስት ይሄኛው እንደዚህ ነው ይሄ እንደዚህ ነው የሚለውን ከዛ ኋላ ሶዛት የተወሰነ አንደርስታንዲንግ እንዲኖረን ወደፊት ሪፈረንስ እንኳን መልሼ ሳነበው አንደርስታንድ ለማድረግ ትንሽ እንደዚህ ግን ሞር እንደዚህ አድርገን መጻፍ ብንለምድ እኔ ራሴ ችግር አለብኝ እንደሱ አልጽፍም እንደዛ ብንለምድ ግን በጣም ትልቅ ነገር ይሆናል
30 or anything smaller. Now, based on the number of years, we calculate the number of payments. Note the camel notation here. I've capitalized the first letter of every word except the first word. So we get years and multiply it by months in year. Again, the code is very self-explanatory. Once we collect all this data, then we calculate the mortgage. So we get the principal multiplied by this expression and then divided by this other expression. Let's have a quick look here. Now, this looks a little bit complicated. So if you want to download my source code, look below this video. I've attached it for you to download. And finally, after we calculate the mortgage, we use the number format class to format this value as a currency. So we get the result, store it in the string mortgage formatted, and print it over here. Now here we could also avoid declaring this variable and simply add this expression over here. But I decided to do this to increase the readability of this code. Otherwise, this line would be so long. But that's just my personal preference. You don't have to follow this. All right, so this was my implementation of the mortgage calculator. However, this program has a number of problems. The first problem is input validation. So if we run this and enter a non-numeric value like XYZ, our program crashes. Or as another example, if we enter a negative value here, our program is not going to behave properly. So that's where conditional statements come to the rescue. In the next section, we're going to talk about conditional statements. You will learn how to use these statements to validate the values entered by the user. So that brings us to the end of this section. I hope you learned a lot and thank you for watching. So in this section, you learn all about variables and constants. You learn about primitive and reference types. You learn that primitive types store simple values, but reference types hold references to complex objects. That's why we call them reference types. You also learn about casting and type conversion. You learn about two types of casting, implicit and explicit. You learn how to work with numbers, strings, and arrays. And finally, you learn how to read input from the terminal. I hope you learned a lot and been enjoying the course so far. In the next section, we're going to look at conditional statements for controlling the flow of our programs. So I will see you in the next section. Hey, Mosh here. I just wanted to make a quick announcement. This course you've been watching is actually the beginning of my complete Java series. In this course, we only talk about the basics, but in my complete series, we go way beyond that. So if you're serious about Java, if you're looking for a job as a Java developer, I highly encourage you to enroll in my complete Java series. It's exactly the same structure, the same quality, but it has way more content. Plus, you will get a certificate of completion that you can add to your resume. So if you're interested, I put the link down below. You can get the course with a discount. And if you're not happy for any reasons, you can ask for a refund within the first 30 days. So I hope to see you in the course. In this section, we're going to look at control flow, or controlling the flow of execution of our programs. We're going to start off by talking about comparison operators for comparing values. Then we're going to talk about logical operators like the logical AND, logical OR, and logical NOT. We use these operators for implementing real-world rules. And then we're going to talk about three different types of control flow statements. We're going to talk about conditional statements for making decisions in our programs. Then we're going to talk about loops for executing code repeatedly. And finally, we're going to revisit our mortgage calculator and add error handling to it. So if the user enters an invalid value, we keep asking them to try again. All right, now let's jump in and get started. We're going to start this section by talking about comparison operators. We use these operators to compare primitive values. For example, are x and y equal or not? So I'm going to declare two integers, x and y. Now let's compare this to see if they're equal or not. So first, I'm going to add this print line statement. Now to compare these variables, we type x equals y. So here we have two equal signs, and this is the equality operator. Don't confuse this with the single equal sign that we use for assignment. That is the operator used over here, okay? So two equal signs represents the equality operator. Now when we run this program, we get true because these values are equal. This expression that we have here is called a Boolean expression. So earlier I told you that an expression is a piece of code that produces a value. This piece of code produces a Boolean value, true or false. That's why we refer to it as a Boolean expression. We also have the inequality operator. So when we run this program, we're going to see false. Let's take a look. We get false because these two variables are equal. So the expression x is not equal to y returns false. We also have greater than or equal to, less than, and less than or equal to. So if I change y to 2, this expression is going to evaluate to true because x is less than or equal to y. Take a look. There you go. Next, we're going to talk about logical operators. In the last tutorial, you learned that a Boolean expression produces a Boolean value. Now, there are times we want to combine multiple Boolean expressions. Let me show you. So I'm going to declare an integer called temperature and set it to 22. Next, we declare a Boolean variable is warm. Now we want to check to see if temperature is greater than 20 and less than 30. So we write a Boolean expression like this. Temperature greater than 20. Here we need to use the AND operator. So these two ampersands represent the logical AND operator in Java. After this, we add our second condition, temperature less than 30. Now, if both these conditions are true, the result of this Boolean expression is going to be true. Otherwise, if at least one of these is false, the result will be false. Let's take a look. So I'm going to print is warm on the terminal. The result is true. But if we change the temperature to, let's say, 12, the result is going to be false. And this is how this works. Java will evaluate this expression from left to right. First, it looks at the first condition. The first condition is false because temperature is not greater than 20. So because this expression is false, it doesn't matter what we have after the AND operator. Java will ignore the other expressions because the AND operator will return true if both conditions are true, okay? Now let's look at another operator, that is the OR operator. So I'm going to delete all this code.
So እነዚህን already ታውቋቸዋላችሁ ብዬ ነው ዝም ያልኳችሁ። And the only difference እዚህ ጋር የምታዩት እቺ boolean የምትለው ቃል ናት። So እንደ data type int double float እያለን ዲክሌር እንደምናደርገው boolean ብለን variable ዲክሌር ማድረግ እንችላለን። ምክንያቱም እዛኛው ላይ ጃቫስክሪፕት ላይ ስንሰራ just we say var ብለን ነው አይደል? So if we say እዚህ ጋር መተን ለምሳሌ like so if I say var x equals to true, but so this is basically declaring x and value true አድርጌ ነው ዲክሌር ያደረኩት። so x ምን አይነት ዳታ ነው ብላችሁ boolean ነው የምትሉት አይደል? ዳታ ታይፕ ነው የምትነግሩኝ boolean ነው ብላችሁ ነው። so the same thing as this ይሄኛው so boolean ብሎ ነው የሚሰየመው ማለት ነው። instead of var it be like boolean እዚህ ጋር so boolean ትሉና እዛ x equals to true. That's gone. X already defined. Okay. So x is equal to ስለተጠቀምኳት define መልሰ ማድረግ አትችልም እያለ ነው። so እንደዚህ ነው ክሬት የምታደርጉት ማለት ነው። እንትን ሲሆን boolean value ያለ ነገር ሲሆን እንደዚህ ክሬት ታደርጋላችሁ። ይሄኛው ደግሞ ያው end operator ሁለት ነገር true ከሆነ true ነው የሚለው so any other ከሆነ false ይላል አይደል? አንደኛው true ነው አንደኛው false ከሆነ false ነው። ፎልስ ያለበት ጠቅላላ ፎልስ ይሆናል ማለት ነው በኤንድ ጊዜ። በኦር ጊዜ ደግሞ ትሩ ያለበት ጠቅላላ ትሩ ይሆናል። ኢዘር ዋን አንደኛው ትሩ ከሆነ ሙሉ ትሩ ይሆናል ማለት ነው።
Now let's look at another operator, that is the OR operator. So I'm going to delete all this code and start with a new example. Let's declare a Boolean has high income. We set it to true. And another Boolean has good credit. We set this to true as well. So let's say we're building an application for processing loans. We want to see if a new applicant is eligible for a loan or not. So we declare another Boolean is eligible. And by the way, look at the names I have used for these variables. They're very meaningful and descriptive. So here's the rule. An applicant is eligible if they have high income or good credit. If one of these conditions is true, they are eligible. So we write has high income or, so these two vertical bars represent the OR operator. So if they have high income or good credit, then they are eligible. So with the OR operator, if at least one condition is true, the result will be true. In this example, when Java evaluates this expression, it starts from the left side. This Boolean variable is true, so it doesn't matter what we have after. Java will not evaluate the rest of this expression. It simply returns true. However, if this variable was false, Java would continue evaluating this expression, hoping that the next Boolean value or the next Boolean expression is true. So this is the OR operator. And finally, we have the NOT operator that we use to reverse a value. Let me show you how that works. So let's declare another Boolean variable has criminal record. We set this to false. So here's the rule we want to implement. In order for someone to be eligible for a loan, they should either have high income or good credit, and they should not have any criminal records. So let's see how we can implement this rule. We have implemented the first part. They should either have high income or good credit. Now we want to make sure that they don't have any criminal records. So we need to combine the result of this expression with this Boolean value using the AND operator. So first we wrap this expression in parentheses. Then we apply the AND operator, and here we add has criminal record. Now we want to make sure they don't have criminal record, and this is where we use the NOT operator. So the NOT operator will reverse the value of this Boolean variable or expression. In this case, this variable is set to false, so when we apply the NOT operator to it, the result would be true. So if the first condition is true and the second condition is true, then that person is eligible for a new loan. So as you can see, these logical operators are very useful in implementing real-world rules. Next, we're going to talk about if statements. In this tutorial, we're going to look at if statements in Java. If statements are extremely important because they allow us to build programs that can make decisions based on certain conditions. Here's an example. In this file, we have a bunch of conditions. If temperature is greater than 30, perhaps we want to display two messages to the user. It's a hot day, drink plenty of water. Otherwise, if it's between 20 and 30, we want to print it's a nice day. And otherwise, we want to print it's a cold day. So let's see how we can implement these rules in a Java program. Back to our main file, we start by declaring a variable, temperature. We set it to 32. Now we use an if statement followed by a pair of parentheses. Inside this parenthesis, we type a Boolean expression or a Boolean value. So let's say temp is greater than 30. Now, if this condition is true, the statement that we add after this if statement will be executed. So let's print it's a hot day. Let's run the program. We get this message because temperature is greater than 30. Now, what if you want to print another message, like drink plenty of water? Here we should add curly braces to define a code block. So if this condition is true, all the code that we have inside of this block will be executed. Let's add another message here, drink water, okay? So this was our first condition. Now let's add the second condition. So after the right brace, we type else if. Once again, we add our parentheses, and inside this parentheses, we type a Boolean expression. If temp is greater than 20 and it's less than or equal to 30, you want to print a different message, like beautiful day. Now here I haven't added the braces because we have a single statement. So braces are only required if we have multiple statements. Now this is a little bit controversial. Some people believe we should always add braces, whether we have a single statement or not. Other people, like myself, believe this creates unnecessary noise in the code. In this tutorial, I'm going to add the braces first and then remove them so you can see the difference. So let's add a pair of curly braces here. And finally, our last condition. So if none of these two conditions are true, then we want to print a different message. So here we simply type else. We don't have any more conditions. So let's add a code block and print cold day. Now let me define a few terms. Here we have an if statement, and this statement has 3 clauses or 3 sections. Here's the first clause, here's the second clause, and here's the third clause. Pay attention to how I have formatted this if statement. So first we have the if clause. The else if and else clauses are placed after these right braces. So we have some kind of hierarchy here. Here we have a parent followed by 2 children. Now let's get rid of these unnecessary braces and reformat our code to see the difference. So I'm going to remove the braces for the else clause and also one more time here. That's better. Now we can simplify this Boolean expression. Basically, we don't need this piece of code here. Here's the reason. If the first condition is not true, what does it mean? That means the temperature is less than or equal to 30. So this expression here is unnecessary. Let's delete this and simplify our code. That's better. Now look at how this code is formatted. On the top, we have if. The else if clause is a little bit indented, but the else clause is not indented. It's at the same level as the if clause. And this looks a little bit ugly. The code is not symmetrical. So if you want to get rid of the curly braces, a better way to format this code is like this. So instead of adding the else if or else clauses after curly braces, we add them on a new line. Now, all these clauses are at the same level. The code is easier to read. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you a very cool technique for simplifying if statements. So let's start by declaring a variable called income and set it to 120,000. Now here we can use an underscore in between these 3 digits to make our code more readable. Now let's say we want to declare a Boolean variable called has high income. If the income is more than $100,000, we want to set this to true. Otherwise, we want to set this to false. So here we can write an if statement like this. If income is greater than $100,000, we want to set has high income to true. However, we get a compilation error here. Let's take a look. Declaration not allowed here. So we cannot declare a variable here. We can only declare variables inside code blocks, like this code block over here. So to declare this variable, we need to add curly braces to define a new code block. Now we have a different problem. This variable that we have defined is scoped to this code block, so it's only available here. We cannot access it outside of this block. Let me show you. So if we print has high income, you can see we have a compilation error, cannot resolve symbol has high income, because this variable is not available outside of the block in which it's declared. So to solve this problem, we can declare this variable outside of this block, Boolean has high income, and then we can simply set it to true in this block. Now we don't need these braces anymore, so let's simplify the code. We add an else clause, otherwise we set has high income to false. Let's remove this print method, we don't need it anymore. So this is one way to implement this scenario, but this code looks very amateurish. A professional programmer doesn't write code like this. Let's improve it step by step. One way to improve this is to give this Boolean variable an initial value. For example, we can set it to false initially and then we implement this condition. So if the income is more than $100,000, then we set this variable to true. With this, we no longer need this else clause. So that was one improvement, but it's still not ideal. In situations like this, we can completely get rid of this if statement here. Let me show you. Instead of hard coding false here, we type our expression. Income is greater than $100,000. So here we have a Boolean expression. If this Boolean expression evaluates to true, this Boolean variable is going to be true. Otherwise, it's going to be false. So this is the simplest, the most elegant, and the most professional way to implement this scenario. Now, one more improvement before we finish this tutorial. I personally prefer to wrap this expression in parentheses, even though technically we don't need parentheses here. But these parentheses make our code more clear, more readable. Let me show you. So I'm going to wrap this inside these parentheses. Now it's very clear, very obvious that on the right side of this assignment operator, we have a Boolean expression. In this tutorial, we're going to look at the ternary operator in Java. So we're going to continue with the example from the last tutorial. We have this income variable. Imagine this is the income of our customers. Now, depending on their income, we want to put these customers in different classes. If their income is more than $100,000, we want to put them in the first class. Otherwise, we want to put them in the economy class. So here's one way to implement the scenario. We declare this string variable, class name. Note that we cannot call this class because class is a reserved keyword. So class name. Now, we write our first condition. If income is greater than $100,000, we set class name to first. Otherwise, we set it to economy. Now, as you learned in the last tutorial, this code looks very amateurish. A professional programmer doesn't write code like this. So one way to simplify this is to give this variable an initial value. So we assume they are in the economy class, and then we check this condition. If this condition is true, we put them in the first class. So with this, we can get rid of this else clause. That is better. Now, in the last tutorial, I showed you how to simplify this even further. But the technique you learned there cannot be used here. In other words, we cannot add income greater than $100,000 here. Because here we have a Boolean expression, but on the left side, we have declared a string variable. So we want to set this to a different string depending on the result of this expression. And this is where we use the ternary operator. So we start with our condition, then we type a question mark. If this condition is true, we add this value here. Otherwise, we add the other value. So this question mark and colon is the ternary operator in Java. It has three pieces. First, we have a condition. If this condition is true, this value will be returned and assigned to our class name variable. Otherwise, this other value will be returned. Now we can completely get rid of this if statement. So put the ternary operator in your toolbox. It's very helpful. Next, we're going to look at switch statements in Java. In this tutorial,
የተርናሪ ኦፕሬተሩ ግልጽ ነው አይደለም? ኤቭሪ ታይም የምንሰራው ስለሆነ ሶ ኩዌስችን ማርክ የምናደርገው እንትኑን ነው። መጀመሪያ ኮንዲሽን ይኖረናል። ኮንዲሽኑን ቼክ አድርግ ማለት ነው። ሶ ቼክ አድርግልንና ትሩ ከሆነ የመጀመሪያውን፣ ትሩ ካልሆነ ደግሞ ሁለተኛውን ስንል ደግሞ ኮለናን አድርገን ከዛ ላይ የምንሰጠው ቫልዩ ይኖራል። ያንን ቫልዩ ይሞላልናል ማለት ነው። ሶ ternary operator, yeah.
Well, we're going to look at switch statements in Java. We use switch statements to execute different parts of code depending on the value of an expression, kind of similar to if statements. Let me show you. So let's say we're going to write a program and check the role of the current user. And then we're going to print different messages or give them different features depending on their role. So let's declare a string variable called role. And here we set this to admin. Now, to check the role of the user, we can write an if statement like this. If role equals admin, then perhaps we want to print you are an admin, Now, you might be wondering why we have this condition here. It's obvious that this condition is always true because we have set role to admin. But this is just for demonstration. In a real program, we're not going to hard code this admin here. So we're going to read the role of the current user from somewhere else. We don't know what it is at the time of writing code, okay? So here we have one condition. Let's write another condition, else if role equals moderator. Perhaps we want to display a different message. So you are a moderator. And finally, if the role is none of these values, we want to print you are a guest. So this is one way to implement this scenario using an if statement. We can also implement this using a switch statement, and sometimes that looks a little bit cleaner. Let me show you. So we start with a switch statement. Then we add parentheses, and inside this parentheses, we add our variable, in this case, role. Next, we define a block of code, and in this block, we add one or more case clauses. So we have a case for an admin. We add a colon here. Now, what do we want to do here? If the role is admin, we want to print you are an admin. So I'm going to copy this line from here and then paste it over here. Now, after this line, we need to add a break statement to jump out of this switch block, okay? Then we add another case clause, so case moderator. Once again, we add a colon. And here we're going to print this other message. So we paste it here, and then we're going to break. Now, optionally, we can have a default clause here. So if none of these previous cases apply, the code that we write in this section will be executed. So here we want to print you are a guest. Now here we don't need to use a break statement because we're at the end of the switch block. So we'll automatically jump out of this block. In contrast, if we didn't use this break statement here, Java will continue executing these other lines here. So if the role is admin, first it will execute this line, and then it will jump to this case block. It will execute this other line, and then after it executes this break statement, it will jump out of the switch block, okay? So this is how we use a switch statement. Now compare this with the if statement. Some people prefer to use if statements, others prefer to use a switch statement. Now, one more thing before I finish this tutorial. Here we're comparing the value of role with strings, but we could also use integers other than the long type. So if role was a byte, a short, or an integer, our cases would look like this. Case 1, case 2, and so on. Now here we have a compilation error because role is a string. Let's change this to an integer, and we can initialize this to 1. So as you can see, with switch statements, we can execute different code depending on the value of an expression.
Okay, so እስካሁን ያየናቸው ጠቅላላ ጃቫስክሪፕት ላይ ተማርናቸው ሁሉም ተመሳሳይ ናቸው። if statement, if else, switch, and ternary operation. What else we say? Logical operations like and or not. ያለን የምንሞላቸው comparison equals to triple equals to አላሳየም። I don't know if it exists or not። እዚህ ላይ እርግጠኛ አይደለሁም። ዳታ ታይፕ ነው strict equality የምንላት ማለት ናት። so እሷን I'm not quite sure። ግን በተረፈ ከዚህ ጀምሮ ያየነው ጠቅላላ እስካሁን so logical operators, if statement, እያንዳንዳቸው ternary operation, switch እንላቸው ጠቅላላ everything are the same as JavaScript ላይ ተማርነው ነው። even አሁን እዚህ ጋር ታያላችሁ exercise with fizzbuzz የሚል ሁላ አለ ማለት ነው። so fizzbuzzን እንድንሰራ ነው next እንትን የሚለን ማለት ነው። so we'll do that tomorrow። ለዛሬ እዚህ ላይ እናቁምና so ነገ ከዚሁ ፒክ አድርገነው እንቀጥላለን ማለት ነው። ኦኬ
እሺ ዳኒ